morning and welcome everyone. I always thought post-coffee is a prime time to have these sessions because people come back energized. I guess we'll know by the end of this session that we hope is going to be extremely interactive. Thank you so much for joining our session titled Strengthening Theories of Change for Rigorous and Actionable Evaluation. As development professionals, we are constantly working on projects that seek to bring about transformative social changes. To truly understand the feasibility, effectiveness, and scalability of such programs, we need a comprehensive theory of change. One that is context-specific, identifies the right preconditions, makes valid assumptions, and clearly lays out the pathways through which change occurs, both the intended and unintended changes. We will not only consider the role of ToCs in strengthening evaluation design, but today we will also reflect on the structural and systemic challenges that arise in dynamic programs and ways to navigate them. We hope this discussion aligns well with the AEW's theme this year, which is navigating crisis and building on successes. In today's uncertain geopolitical and funding environment, we require theories of change that can adapt, respond, and deliver impact. Before I introduce our panelists, I'll quickly talk about the structure of this session. For the first 40 minutes, our panelists would have about 10 minutes to present. After that, we'll move into a question and answer session. Please feel free to ask as many questions as possible, but also please feel free to share your reflections and comments, because we have a special request from Emily to make this as interactive as possible, so please feel free to share your experience. Without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists now. Our first panelist is Marie Gaarder. She's the Executive Director of 3IE and has over 25 years of experience leading global evaluation initiatives and advancing the use of high-quality evidence in policy and programs worldwide. Next, we have Mitch Rakusin. I didn't want to incorrectly pronounce his last name. So we have Mitch Rakusin, Senior Results Management Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, and he brings more than 15 years of experience in project design, evaluation, and results-based management. Third, we have Neeta Goel. She's Senior Evaluation Specialist at ADB's Independent Evaluation Department and has extensive experience in multi-sector evaluations, including gender, health, and financial inclusion. Previously, she led the monitoring, learning, and evaluation work for the Gates Foundation in India. Last but not the least, we have Emily Sharp. She's the Director of Strategy, Performance, and Learning at the Pacific Community. She's a practitioner and regional leader in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, known for championing culturally grounded and participatory approaches in the Pacific. To begin with, I'd like to invite Marie to share her reflections on why theories of change matter and how testing them can make a real difference.
Thank you, Divya, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about, I have a slightly different angle than what you will expect from some of the other presentations, which is how you apply a theory of change to your own organization. I am doing slides. I decided that in the middle of the night because there are quite a few resources and links in here that I'm pretty sure actually are very valuable to many of you. So I thought, better to see them and potentially have your cameras ready to access them and have them available for later. The first resource, in fact, that you see up here is the Theories of Change in Reality book, Strengths, Limitations, and Future Directions. I highly recommend it. It was edited by Andrew Coleros, Marie-Hélène Adrien, and Tony Terrell. And it has a lot of very different applications of theories of change, from more theoretical discussions to practical applications, etc. And within that book is a chapter that I have written, which I'll talk to you all about here. And I think this will now... Is this supposed to... Okay. So as an evaluator and the head of 3IE, an international research and evaluation organization, I realized that I needed to subject our organization to the similar scrutiny that we subject others to implementing organizations and programs. And so I think, it is only fair to and appropriate to do it to ourselves. Most institutions have an overall vision or mission or objective statement that pretty much indicates what it hopes to achieve. And this can, in a sense, be interpreted as the overarching theory of change of the institution. Now, the bylaws of 3IE, which dates back to 2008 when we were founded, and I think our founding executive director, Howard White, is sitting in the back, and Manny Jimenez, as you all know by now, was executive director at 3IE after Howard, so this is also a fun occasion where all three of us are in one event together. So that was the charitable purpose, was to contribute to the fulfillment of well-being by encouraging and funding the research, production, and use of evidence from rigorous impact evaluations for policy decisions that improve social and economic development programs in low and middle-income countries. Slight mouthful. So we have revised this a bit, but I think the crux of the intention has remained the same over the subsequent 18 years. So pretty much the vision is to improve lives in low and middle-income countries through evidence-informed decision-making. That's a slightly easier way to see it. And the underlying theory of change was, you can simplify the way of saying it, is also providing funding for effectiveness evidence. This would lead to its production. That's the first sort of assumption or a theory here. The evidence produced would be relevant. Synthesis of and evidence platforms would then help improve the access to this evidence. Access to evidence would increase use, and then use would result in more effective policies and programs. That's sort of, and then we can all discuss all the variations and, and assumptions, etc. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. With the benefit of hindsight, I would like to suggest that over the subsequent 18 years, the organization has used what I call the balloon squeezing approach to the theory of change. And this is not AI created. I'm sure you can all see this is me on the plane drawing. So I hope you appreciate that. And I'm sure that this simplification is going to be sort of, could be challenged by the previous EDs, but simplifications, that's what that's what frameworks and models are for. So I'm looking forward to any thoughts from previous leaders of the organization as well. And then, but also to mention that the balloon squeezing approach is sort of a type of adaptive approach to theory of change. And I'll show you why almost in visuals here. So the idea is that when you squeeze a balloon, especially those long ones that you see in the back here, the air gets displaced within the balloon, but it doesn't leave, right? It just bulges somewhere else. And then if you think about the air in the balloon as really obstacles to using evidence to improve development policies and programs, and you try to address them, right, by squeezing them. That's sort of, if you can keep that in your head as the idea. So squeezing the balloon is, in a sense, testing the underlying hypothesis. Now, one other thing, you all know that, or in most theories of change, you start from left to right, or sometimes it's from bottom to up. But anyway, so the early assumptions around funding and inputs and early outputs, etc., are on the left, and then it becomes more complicated towards the right. Now, clearly, you would start on the left squeezing. And I hope that's obvious to all of you, but you cannot test whether something is used and then whether it has the desired effect, which is the right side of the theory of change, if it has not been provided in the first place. So you have to provide it in the first place. So that's some of the underlying assumptions here. So let's see. So, whoops. There's some. Squeeze two. Okay, there's a slide missing. Sorry about that. So anyway, so first of all, the first squeeze of the balloon was, funding leads to production. There was 3IE and was, for example, funded from various organizations early in 2008, and to really sort of get a lot more impact evaluations out in internationally. It was based on the idea that, and CGD led a report looking at the state of evidence in international development, and found that basically came out with a report that's called "When Will We Ever Learn?" And found that there was very little rigorous effectiveness evidence, so impact evaluation focused evidence in the field to tell, to inform about what is working and not sufficiently. Now, what we found was that when we launched these call for proposals, we didn't know how much interest there would be, how much opportunities, etc. But in fact, there was a lot of response. So funding, in fact, basically led to a lot of provision, supply of impact evaluations, lots of interest from programs across the globe. And so, that basically led to over time, the field exploding from a few hundred impact evaluations early on. We now have about 20,000 impact evaluations, for example, in our development evidence portal, sort of 18 years on. Also, the number of institutions that were able to carry out these kind of studies increased. Oh, thank you. Increased dramatically starting from 2008 and upwards. So this sort of addressed the need for more evidence, but of course there are remaining gaps. So you can say that it was squeezed. The challenge of not having enough effectiveness evidence was started to be addressed, but the job is not done. I mean, first of all, there are lots of sectors where there are much less evidence than there is funding, and there's disproportionately, sort of in the social sectors, we find, for example, that they receive about 28% of development assistance globally, but they have 55% share of impact evaluations registered in our portal. I have to caveat with that. Whereas other sectors like transport, energy, and governance sectors, which receive about 35% of development assistance. I know these are slightly older numbers, so I'm not sure what the numbers are today. But these kind of sectors have only about 7% of the total impact evaluations in the portal. So just saying that there are. It's not that the evidence matches the amount of funding going in, but also more generally, we also know that it's not as if gaps get filled, like you do all your evaluations in certain sector and now because we keep innovating, we keep having to address new problems, etc. So there is not there will not be a point where we're really done. Now. Then, so the first squeeze, we're well on our way, but it's never going to be fully done. Then, the second squeeze was around, well, is the evidence produced relevant? And what we realized very early on in 3IE is that there were quite a few shortcomings with the early crops of impact evaluations. There were challenges. And one of the first ones, and which we then built into our quality assurance, when we selected proposals, we had criteria for what good quality evaluations would look like. First criteria that we emphasized a lot was you have to have a theory of change. Other things were you have to mix methods, you have to be able to bring in process evaluations as well to explain, what your findings. You should look at equity. You should also look at the cost, so we can talk about cost effectiveness, etc. So we had a number of other requirements, and I have to say most proposals that came in the early days to 3IE ticked very few of those boxes. And interestingly for this audience, on the theory of change, there was a lot of pushback. There was sort of this idea that, well, that's just bringing out your prior biases of how it should look. So why should we just do the RCTs or the quasi-experimental approaches, and why would we need a theory of change? That has fortunately changed a lot, but that was what we found, that the relevance is still very much an ongoing issue. Now, let me see if this works better. And we continue to push on all these kind of areas that we believe need to be improved in the field. Okay, so then squeeze 3. Now you see the person has 3 hands, right? Yeah. And a black nail polish. Anyway, so the idea was at that point that the field of impact evaluations was exploding. There's several impact evaluations and other type of evaluations coming out in your area every day. None of you, even evaluators, will be able to read all of those and make sense of them, and policymakers will certainly not. And so the next sort of challenge was, okay, how do we deal with this flood of information, and how do we deal with it in a way that is that treats it correctly, that can separate good from bad evidence, etc. And so 3IE was also then focusing in on doing systematic reviews and bringing the body of evidence on certain matters together to be able to talk more generally about what works in certain areas. 3IE under Howard created also the International Development Coordination Group, which is a coordination group within the Campbell collaboration that promotes systematic reviews and support the network of systematic review organizations. And we and others in our field, IPA, JPAL, that you heard about as well, and many others, are now increasingly making evidence rapidly available. There are help desks, rapid evaluations, development evidence portals, other portals. I know there's a number of portals present in this room, etc. So all of that access is being improved a lot. So Squeeze 3, I think, is sort of also working really well and seeing some good effects on access. But you're seeing that it's bulging, right? You're seeing what's happening. The air is sort of getting towards the end of the theory of change here. And so, let me just see. And so basically what we're, are now coming to is the issue about whether access leads to use and whether use leads to improved lives. And this is where, that's in my sense where we have gotten. So first of all, there is a lot of access, but at the same time there are a lot of, and there are many independent evaluation offices with evaluations that have been looking at the use of evidence in their organizations and talking about all the obstacles as well that they're facing, systems of obstacles, incentives obstacles, training, resources, all of that. It's not well aligned in organizations, and I believe also in governments, to really incentivize and change the culture of evidence use sufficiently. So that is where really then at this point, I think, where we all are seeing that we need to focus and 3IE, we are very much focusing our theory of change and our strategy. We're not letting the other things go, but we're realizing that if we want to really ensure that there are organizational culture changes that sort of really promotes evidence use. We need to learn more about how to do that. And we're doing that in a number of ways. This is one of those slides where I would suggest, if you're interested, that you take pictures. So first of all, there is a call for proposals that was out. It's now closed, but it's actually a really interesting program that 3IE and University of Birmingham is leading for the FCDO Research Commissioning Center, which is a research program on evidence-informed policymaking. And so it has two streams of research. One is looking at how research has been used or not in public decision-making. And the other is, second stream evaluates the effectiveness of evidence broker, both organizations and evidence brokering tools in increasing evidence use. So you heard yesterday Dean talk about, for example, policy labs. They sound interesting, and there are now a lot of them, but they haven't actually been very well evaluated. Especially sort of, are they institutionalizing the evidence use in leaving the capacities and the culture change needed in government? So these are the kind of things that we're hoping that this kind of research is going to bring out. The other thing that we have been working on in 3IE, we've also, even though impact evaluation in our name, we are taking a much more sort of now sort of holistic approach to evaluation and saying, look, it needs, the method needs to fit the question at hand. And so one of the things that we've developed, and it sort of answers the question, what moments in the project or policy cycle are amenable to evidence-informed, to being evidence-informed, and by what type of evidence? And we've developed what we call a methods menu, which I really urge you to look at. It's quite detailed, quite informative. It was done together with Millennium Challenge Corporation in the US, and it was focusing in on policy and institutional reform sector, the peer sector. But in fact, if you look at it, it could be applied to almost any sector. And so that's the second link. We're also leading the Global Evidence Commitment, which is a sort of a commitment of a number of organizations to look at their own institutional cultures and see, you heard me yesterday mention this TRIPS framework, training, resources, incentives, processes, and signals, that these are levers that an institution can use to try to influence how evidence is used in the organization. And with and this is what we're trying to sort of promote, is learning across organizations. In this case, the Inter-American Development Bank, NORAD is part of it, FCDO, a number of others. USAID was a part of it. MCC potentially is still. But anyway, so there's learning across. What have you tried to incentivize your staff to use evidence in your organization, and has it worked? That kind of learning, that's the idea. And then finally, the TRIPS framework that I mentioned, there's just a link to that. And then just finally say that the last squeeze, then, which is around whether then use leads to impact on the ground, we would love to evaluate. We actually been talking to funders and saying that would be really interesting. If you have used the findings from evaluations and then implemented those, let's go back and see whether what you then implemented, whether that improved what you wanted to improve. And interestingly, the funders we talked about, it's interesting, but yeah, we don't dare. Because what if we find that the research and so on is actually not making a difference compared to the programs where we didn't do it in such a sophisticated way? And so this is a final plea from me here as well, is that there's some brave organizations, I'm sure, and people, champions in this room. This is the kind of, I think, next generation research and evaluation that we should be doing. And I think that's, let me see. Yeah, so that's just a picture of the TRIPS framework. So let me end there, and I know I went over, but I promise not to say anything more.
Thank you so much, Marie, for the thoughtful and visual presentation on what theories of change should look like in terms of an institution. Having said that, now I'll turn to Mitch to shed some light on the design ex-ante design perspective on theories of change. Over to Mitch.
How about now? All right. Great. Okay, thanks. I'm honored to be here. I'm representing ADB in the Strategic Policy and Partnerships Department in the Results Management Division. And part of our responsibility is to steer the corporate development results at the portfolio level and also help enable high-quality project designs from a log frame standpoint. It's what we call the Design Monitoring Framework, or DMF. And so I think a lot about this from a design standpoint. How do we ensure that good design is being met, and the theory of change, or the practice of utilizing and developing theories of change, are fundamental to that. And so the first thing that we really like to talk about is what are the benefits and use cases of utilizing theories of change at a design. What is the process look like? How does that situate within our current business process? And then, most importantly, what are the constraints that we're finding to getting project teams to be able to utilize this on a standard, on an ongoing basis? So, from the ex-ante standpoint, just to be clear, developing a theory of change should be standard operating procedure, but it's not. Part of the design process, it has specific use cases that are fundamental to good practice, especially when you want to talk about designing for success, and it greatly helps upset the project for in terms of relevance, effectiveness, sustainability, and additionality. First of all, it's a tool for thinking. And I should say all this. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, and I'm also skimming the surface. So, but I'm happy to follow up with very specific examples of what I'm talking about. But within the time constraints we have, I'm just going to quickly discuss some of the benefits here. But it's definitely a tool for thinking. It allows the project teams and our counterparts to systematically consider how the interventions are actually going to work. Are they going to meet expectation? And also, what is missing from the results chain that they haven't thought about? They provide rigor in applying and contextualizing evidence to help underpin the logic of the intervention. The decision on approaches, why are we deciding to do centers of excellence versus another approach? As well as ex-ante validation of counterfactuals. So a good theory of change would consider, well, what if this intervention didn't happen? Good theories of change would help prioritize the indicators. So I don't know about other organizations, but in ADB we have very limited number of indicators that we include in our log frame. So what are the most important, what are the critical path to achieving project outcomes? What are the critical outputs that are needed? In complex multidimensional projects, these really need to be considered, because you can't just come in with 50 different indicators that will set you up for failure. Surfacing the assumptions and the risks is one of the most important use cases of the theory of change, because it allows you to ask the question at each causal link, what needs to happen that's implied? What are our milestones towards sustainability at this juncture or that juncture? So seeing it mapped out in a results chain allows you to really understand how the process is supposed to work. And beyond that, additional significant benefits really lend themselves well to good design and also set yourself up well for success. So from a project team standpoint, it gives you a stronger negotiating advantage when your client wants to propose or pursue interventions that may not be developmentally sound. You can always hopefully waive the theory of change and say, hey, where does this actually fit? So it helps you as a project team member, team leader, use that as a stronger negotiating tactic, if you will. It also enhances ownership. amongst our executing agencies and implementing actors, especially when they're compartmentalized. Maybe they have only one facet of the project that they're contributing to. They may not see how the whole project comes together to contribute to the overarching outcomes. So being able to see all of this at a glance for them is hugely important. And that fostering ownership also then leads to facilitating faster loan approvals, both from the government side as well as from the ADB side. So it's really, really important that they are able to see the big picture. Also, having this kind of results chain at a glance leads to better transition from processing to implementation. One of the challenges that we have is that oftentimes our processing teams are different from our implementation teams, and there's a gap in the knowledge of how did we come up with these decisions, why is this project making sense, what's the big picture around this. That's really an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to successful project implementation. Of course, it leads to stronger project M&E. It will help incorporate the evaluative mindset at the beginning. It will identify in the terms of, to use the balloon squeezing, for each causal link, are you asking the right questions? Are you interrogating the process during the course of implementation? Are we learning from that during implementation? And so that is effectively what good M&E looks like. Are you doing course corrections based on right data and good learning questions? And of course, at closure and evaluation, a good TOC will really help you out, because then you don't have to rely on the evaluators to design the TOC themselves, which may or may not be validated with assumptions that were made back 5 years prior. So having a strong TOC at the beginning certainly leads to better evaluation outcomes. Further, there's evidence from the World Bank, from the Development Impact Group, that good TOCs at the outset will actually lead to better projects in terms of basic inputs and outputs that most of our teams are really concerned about, which is contract disbursements and processing performance. Finally, the TOC will help contribute to strengthening not only the relevance, effectiveness, sustainability, but encourage better alignment of the project to development impacts, maybe that are beyond necessarily the immediate outputs and outcomes. So being able to see how what we are really trying to impact from a development standpoint, and be able to identify the linkages that would allow us to measure those and evaluate those. Oftentimes our teams are not able to really conceptualize why, for example, do we care about improvement in mobility? Why do we care about improvement in irrigation? What's the actual longer-term development impacts that we're trying to accomplish? So that's really important. So those are the use cases, those are the benefits. And on the processing side, there is a natural opportunity to undertake robust participatory TOCs. All projects, at least with ADB, are required to incorporate a problem analysis as derived from a thematic and sector assessment. And then from there, they develop the project design. And with that, the formulation of the log frame. But there's a missing link. And that missing link is the theory of change. A rigorous, robust theory of change. And this is something that could be organically and naturally inserted into the process. But the challenges to doing that are not insignificant. Ideally, this would take place at a pre-concept stage, at the what we call reconnaissance stage, where the project teams, along with our counterparts in the DMCs, and again, and I should have said this, really coming from the sovereign side. The non-sovereign has its own process and its own approach and deserves its own discussion. But from the reconnaissance side, this is when it should take place, at the pre-concept stage, so that theory of change is embedded into the concept stage, and then it's iterated throughout the appraisal and approval process. Nevertheless, with all these use cases, all these benefits, and this natural insertion of the process, why doesn't it take place? Why don't we do this on a regular basis? That's the key question. And the most obvious reason is it's not required. The only mention of a TOC is in our what we call our DMF guidelines, which are very low on the totem pole of ADB's policy architecture. So we have staff instructions, we have operation manuals, and then we have guidelines. And guidelines are nice to have. But even if they were required, as say an annex to a concept note or in the template for our proposal, we would run the risk that it becomes yet another compliance, copy and paste function to expedite the box ticking mindset. And this is a very real issue. So we can put it into an annex, we can say this is what it should look like, we can give you all the guidelines, and yet people will still, to expedite the approval, go ahead and just start copying and pasting from previous ones that worked. And that's the challenge, What we're trying to do, what we have is this tension between compliance and quality. So, and I say this recognizing that project teams, especially team leaders, are under immense pressure to meet volume targets, are faced with short time horizons, and a ton of requirements to process loans. And so the natural approach is to find as many shortcuts as possible. And plus, they would argue that the concept note and the proposal itself are essentially an elaborated description of the theory of change, so why have a separate write-up? Why add to the task when our most recent reforms are actually designed to improve efficiencies, not to create further work? There are weak incentives. Project teams are motivated really to assess the most proximate outputs and outcomes in the results chain. And they put more weight on processing than on implementation or evaluation. So why bother if there's little or to no reward? Projects are demand-driven, responsive to client priorities. So a TOC, if done well, could surface unwelcome insights into the logic underpinning the go decision, or the approaches conceived before the actual project is truly validated. And project teams do not have experience with developing robust TOCs, normally. And without that experience, the value of the theory of change is often unclear. So I'll conclude with this question: what can we do to foster widespread use of TOCs at the design stage? And this is where we come in. There is a coalition, if you will, from the strategic policy, results management, economic research, development impact, and evaluation corners of the bank, that we're beginning to work more collaboratively, intentionally, toward enhancing quality writ large on both sovereign and non-sovereign operations. And there are consistent calls from our leadership, including the offices of our president, our vice president, and the board, to enhance quality not only at entry but throughout the project lifecycle. So it starts with leadership, collaboration, and intentionality. And then we have to focus on precise adjustments in policy, using scalpels, not sledgehammers, to update requirements in terms of instructions, evaluation criteria, enhanced templates that require more insightful information that comes from a clear TOC. And then it has to be complemented with stronger internal QA that focuses on quality, not compliance, and most importantly, well, not most importantly, but certainly important, broad-based capacity building with our staff internally, but also with our DMC counterparts. So these are the tools that we have in our toolbox to nudge behaviors of our project teams and counterparts ever toward desired practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch, for grounding us in the design perspective. It's now important to reflect on what happens at the grassroots levels when programs are underway. For this, I'd like to invite Neeta to bring in the ex-post evaluation perspective. She'll talk about challenges in operationalizing TOCs and how can we strengthen TOCs through evaluation. Over to Neeta.
Thank you, Divya. Hi, everyone. I'm assuming you can hear me and the mics are working. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and I think I'll start by expressing gratitude to 3IE colleagues and IED colleagues for the opportunity to be here and to be able to share reflections and learn from my panelists, but also all of you. I feel like, as Mitch said, this is a room full of people who've grappled with ToCs and continue to work on them. It'll be great to crowdsource questions and answers, and I hope we can do some of that because it'll be interesting to hear from you as well. Mitch, thank you for setting the stage in terms of how we work on ToCs at ADB. I think that makes it easier to understand what's happening upstream, and then I will just focus on when it comes to us at IED, and by the time it's time for us to do the ex-post evaluations, how does this translate in terms of ToCs? So as Mitch already pointed out, ADB does, through its guidance on design and monitoring frameworks, request for ToCs, even when they don't expressly call it that necessarily. But the quality varies depending on how much interest a project team has in creating a meaningful ToC. And I think this is pretty standard across project teams, not just at MDVs, but beyond as well. So by the time it comes down to us for evaluations, there have been situations where we've seen there are no ToCs that pre-exist, and the IED evaluation teams have to literally start with creating and designing those ToCs in collaboration with the project teams, because the attempt is to understand what was, as Mitch also referenced, 5 years ago, what were you thinking when you designed this program and tried to put it together. This is a hard one, but it's also interesting because when you put operations people and evaluation people in the same room and you try to create a retrospective ToC, there are multiple perspectives that come into play. And it's also interesting to see how the operations people have been thinking about things differently when you think about causal pathways. What are the risks and assumptions? What were the external factors that we were thinking about when that project was implemented? There are also other constraints which could come up in other types of evaluation products, like validations that we do. ADB, perhaps like other MDBs, also has a system when we put project design and monitoring frameworks together. There are corporate results indicators that the projects have to be tagged to. But the challenge there becomes that if everything bubbles up to a corporate results framework, it doesn't always allow project teams to figure out indicators that work for them. And in the context of in their local context. So ADB is shifting on that front with a new corporate results framework that has been released. They're allowing more flexibility where you do pick corporate results framework indicators, but you're also allowed to pick your own that may be relevant in your country context or in your project context. And that has come as a relief, as I've heard from country teams as well as from project teams. But when it comes to the evaluation, it becomes a question on how do we measure success? And I think calling attention to the purpose of or the theme of our conference this week, when you are hit by a crisis, even if you had a ToC, does it still stand? And I think everyone in this room has grappled with COVID and other external downturns. That ToC, that even if it was developed and it was the perfect ToC 5 years ago, it has shifted, and we all know about pivoting in the times of COVID and trying to understand how do we measure up. I know we have teams at IED that have very strongly defended country teams, saying that, of course, they're not going to be able to deliver as per their original results framework. COVID happened, and they pivoted, and we should judge success on the basis of what was intended, how did they pivot, how useful was the project to the government or the citizens in a particular DMC. So I think from that perspective, the point that I'm trying to make is that many times there's, even among evaluation teams, there is a lot of attention paid to putting the ToC together, but perhaps not as much in terms of keeping it alive and taking a look at it periodically to say, are we still on track with this ToC that we created several years ago? Country programming strategies usually have a midterm review, and one good point to do that, or one inflection point to relook at the ToC, is probably at that point to try and understand, did the plan work out in the way that we thought it would, or have we had to pivot because things have changed or priorities have changed? I think the other challenge that we've noted is that in terms of products, for example, we have TA support. TA support is often attached to a project, but when you're doing the validation of that TA support, there's no reference to the broader TOC or what is it that it's trying to support, and do we measure, like it's a standalone technical advisory project, even though it may be linked to another larger project. And there is often not a connect between that smaller technical assistance project and the larger project that you're trying to accomplish with the outcomes and the design and monitoring framework that it brings. There has been, as Mitch suggested also, there has been reflection at ADB on this. Our colleagues in the Economic Research and Development Impact Department last year came up with a recommendations paper on strengthening development impact at ADB. And they've come up with a number of recommendations in terms of how we could do better. And one of the areas of focus is actually the theory of change and the fact that we should be requiring it and making sure that it becomes an integral part of the project design and monitoring process. And they've come up with a number of ways to pilot some of those ideas, learn from them before they are implemented at scale. So there is some reflection in terms of how TOCs are being used and what is the value that they offer. I think where we probably need to do better is in the implementation, in incentivizing good theories of change that are relevant across the products and modalities that ADB offers. It's also important to think about them, I think, as evaluators from both pillars of accountability and learning. I think given a group of evaluators, we would mostly agree that what do we hope to accomplish through evaluation? It's both accountability and learning. And the accountability part is sometimes the easier to assess. Did it work? Did it not? And your TOCs that you design can help you get there. The learning part becomes a little more of a challenge because there's no easy answer there. So when we have a TOC as evaluators, when we're designing the evaluation, then can our focus be on did the assumed causal pathways that were identified 5 years ago or 10 years ago, did they pan out in the way that we thought was possible? Did the external environment and the assumptions and risks that come up, did those work out in the way that we thought? If not, where were the shifts? Were they shifts that could have been foreseen? Were they shifts that we should account for as we move into the next phase of a country's program? What guidance do we have when we think about transferability? Are there things that we are building in terms of, are there lessons that we are learning that could help in the context of another DMC or another 5-year country partnership strategy in the same country? I know it's happening. I see a little less of this, but it would be great if our colleagues working on systematic reviews or other forms of systematically gathering evidence could also point to some of these as you consolidate the evidence. I think my fellow panelists have already talked about the fact that nobody has time to read through, especially implementers and policymakers, don't have time to read through or wade through multiple studies. And that's where systematic reviews and systematic literature reviews really help. And can we do more as a community in terms of documenting this particular causal pathway is what we started with, but we had to shift because it didn't pan out in exactly the way that we intended. What were the mechanisms that actually worked out so that somebody else designing a similar intervention or a partnership strategy could actually come up with, could look at that and say, here is where we start, because here's the evidence base, and now we design, drawing on that evidence base. So I think with that, I'll stop. I'll just say the TOCs need to be kept dynamic. It's not something you do at the start of a project. It's something you continue to look at as you go along. And so I would encourage that. And I think coming back to our conference theme in terms of navigating crisis, how do we do that? One way is keeping our TOCs alive. I look forward to hearing from you all during the break, during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neeta, for underscoring the importance of dynamic theories of change as opposed to static ones. I think we've now heard of what ought to be, what can we do from a design perspective, and challenges associated with it and how to navigate them. I think now I would like to invite Emily to talk about real-life applications and importance of culturally grounded and participatory approaches in designing theories of change.
Warm Pacific greetings, everyone. I'm really humbled to be on this panel, and so much already has resonated. And I'll try and weave some of those resonations, particularly, Marie, in terms of thinking about theories of change in reality. Mitch, you talked about the importance of leadership, of collaboration, intentionality. And Neeta, that tension between nesting theories of change or finding the right balance between top-down, bottom-up. And I'm going to do that really focusing on context, on culture, and capacity. And maybe I'll start with a story. So I work for a grand old lady of an organisation in Pacific Standard. She's turning 80 very soon. She works with 22 Pacific Island countries and territories across 25 sectors. Our structure is a bit like a national government, and we really see ourselves as the extended arms of those who we serve. So I know we have many of our Pacific participants in the room, but for example, Nan from Cook Islands turned 60 this year. We see ourselves as an extension of our 60-year-old member. There are over 1,400 languages spoken across the Pacific, and a lot of the times we are referred to as small island developing states. I think many of us see ourselves as boss, big ocean states. Because the colonial constructs, when you start with that narrative, actually shapes the methods that you choose, the measures that you choose, the worldviews which dominate what validity looks like, what robustness looks like, and how that has played out on an 80-year-old grand lady of the Pacific is that when I humbly joined her story 10 years ago, we were very close to failing what is called the aid quality check of one of our key donors, which has huge ramifications on an organisation for whom the membership fees maybe account for 3% of our income. And the rest came from core and programmatic funding. So when your key donor is letting everybody else know that you're failing your AQC, you are very likely to be experiencing reduced funding from other members. So that was my challenge. And some of the good advice from some of our implementing partners was to say I nearly needed to follow, focus on compliance, templates, compliance with those templates, making sure that we were taking on the rigour of our partners. We have 80 donor partners, so I'm not sure which we were meant to choose in that plethora of 80 donor partners who all have different criteria and compliance measures. But really luckily, our members also gave me good advice, and that was to work through the principles of inclusivity, ownership, and participation. So instead, we focused on evaluation literacy and building a culture of valuing evaluation and evidence and the application of that. And I knew I couldn't do that alone. So we grew a network of monitoring, evaluation and learning advisors embedded in our organisation. When I joined, there was 2. There's now 44, working across 25 sectors. So when I joined, our income was about 80 million, 3 mal-advisors nearly failing our AQC, looking like the solution was going to be templates. But luckily we had great leadership who gave us principles to work by. We had willingness because, in fact, we were in a crisis. Scientists don't often like to have to take the time to do monitoring, evaluation and learning, but when they know that they're going to be impacted because of investment, then there's an incentive for them. And also it was the posture with which we took. We didn't set ourselves up as an expert group. We set ourselves up as people with MEL capabilities to accompany our scientists and our project staff along their journey of building their ownership, their literacy, and their valuing of MEL in fisheries, in health, in agriculture, in oceans, in the different sectors. We then sought to undertake a massive survey of our members in 2018. And because we're up for the challenge, we took on Pawson and Tilley's realist evaluation thinking. And that seeks to make explicit the implicit. What are those hidden, invisible context, mechanism, outcome pathways that fire or not to help achieve results? Because until we really got beneath the surface of understanding for whom, in which contexts, and how change was happening, when you average out in a highly complex culturally and contextual region, you have no idea if, in fact, making a difference to the average is going to be making things far worse for the people at the edges of the bell curve. And we'd been told to be inclusive and participatory. So doing a realist evaluation methodology then uncovered, theoretically, some of these context mechanism outcome pathways, which we then took on to develop up our organisational theory of change, which is now clearly situated in the front of our strategic plan. And some of those that are in what we call the through part of our theory of change are about building trusted relationships. They're about being able to take international methodologies and standards and reports and contextualising them. It's about knowing, being, living Pacific cultures and context. It's about our convening power. Now, these are things that were not visual in our theories of change before that. It was all technocratic, sectoral work from the outputs to the outcomes, and not these soft, what is it really about working with us that is helping to achieve results in the region? Changes in knowledge, changes in impact, changes in practice, impact or systemic. So having the theory of change that's informed by realist thinking has meant that we can intentionally include in investment negotiations activities that will build on trust. And our scientists love that. They love to be able to build in to their next GCF project or their DFAT project activities that are not only about collecting fish observation data on vessels out at sea, but they're about building trust with their national counterparts so that when that data is collected, it is also trusted and is given in a format that's going to be more easily applied and taken up by the decision makers and the politicians. So we stop, we reflect, we learn. Our governing council then also said, actually, we don't really think you're actually meeting all of our needs. So I think we need to do a review. So last year we did an independent institutional review of 10 years of independent organisation evaluations that have been conducted on us as an organisation to really see the extent to which we are, which was a great challenge, responding to the recommendations. Are we adapting? Are we pivoting? Why are we not? What have been the challenges and the barriers? And what does that mean for our members? The thing that excites me the most is that these are questions coming from our members. These are curious members demanding evidence about how we can serve them better. So the evaluative literacy didn't stick with the organisation. It has been now embedded in our governance structures. And then that demand was, well, if you can increase your MEL capacity in the organisation, what about helping with the MEL capacity in the member countries? So a couple of years ago, with the support from the New Zealand Foreign Affairs and Trade, we launched the PAC-MEL initiative. And this was about convening practitioners, commissioners, people who were stuck in jobs where they had to produce reports or do monitoring alone, without qualification, and bringing them together to really understand what it was that was both a strength and a need in the broader community. One of the resounding needs was actually for a qualification, because many members were travelling for 1 week training, potentially coming here or with ADB, World Bank, and the training was much needed and very welcomed. But when those practitioners got back into country, being able to apply that new knowledge in a sustainable way and then have to navigate maybe a manager not having been at the training and not understanding what this new thinking was and not having the systems and processes that were the same during the training in reality meant that actually there was need for more. So we took on a journey of creating the first qualification below a master's in monitoring, evaluation and learning in the Southern Hemisphere. And we now have the diploma, the Pacific Diploma in monitoring, evaluation and learning, with the first lot of cohorts going through at the moment through the University of the South Pacific. And that is a diploma that has been co-created in the Pacific using Pacific philosophies, ideologies, epistemologies, languages, case studies, offered by Pacific institutions, because we know that context and culture are incredibly important alongside capacity. So 10 years later, we have this ecosystem that is far from perfect. But it has changed considerably from when I humbly joined 10 years ago and was able to learn from those who have been before. But our learning continues. And now that we have strategies and national development plans that are planning into the 2030, or in the example of Cook Islands, a 100-year national plan, we have to be thinking about methodologies, including for theory of change, that can think in decades. So we're blending theory of change with strategic foresight to then be able to bring a richer picture to that process and product. And this comes to the point of ownership that has been brought up. When we set out to develop a theory of change, the process is sometimes actually far more important than the product, because it means that those people who have given their time, have debated, have come to consensus or not, have skin in the game and a sense of ownership. And therefore the likelihood of that product then being something that is seen as a navigational tool, not just something that you put on the shelf and you come to at your midterm review, is much higher. But we're also learning that we are failing some of our people. So I'm just going to do something as a bit of a visual. Excuse me. So there's an empty chair. And when we conduct participatory workshops now, we always include the empty chair. The empty chair is about people who are not in the room, the participants who haven't had the invitation or the door opened. One of the most important people in the empty chair is our youth. If we're planning in decades, I'm certainly not going to be in this role in 10 years' time. We need to be including our emerging or early career professionals, our youth in our programs, in our citizens, and we even need to be thinking about what can we be thinking about in terms of needs and aspirations of the empty chair who represents the generations who've not yet been born. Because the implications of our theories of change that we co-create now, yes, they're our guiding star for us into the future. Our vision statements and our foresight can help us think about if what we're doing in the present is going to enable us to realise those visions. But the implications for those who have not yet been born are those that will bear the legacy of our failures. They'll bear the legacy of the assumptions we never tested. They'll bear the legacies of the views that we never sought. So how can we creatively, but with intentionality and with evidence and with much view to those who've been before us as well, our elders, be planning for and theorising for those who will inherit what is to come? The other for us is around the challenge of projects. The Pacific, I'm sure, like many other regions, is like a graveyard littered with the headstones of dead projects. And within those tombstones are dead theories of change as well. So our members have asked us to really be thinking about more programmatic thinking, capability thinking, systems thinking, and encouraging our investment partners to also be investing flexibly in those longer term system changes. And I think when we do that, then our theory of change methodologies also need to be thinking about how do we develop theories of change, perhaps nested theories of change. Perhaps it's bringing in foresight and futures into our theories of change. For flexible, adaptive, iterative, long-term aspirations for the results that we will feel that we have co-created for the people who have not yet been born. Thanks.
Emily, thank you so much on your insights on the importance of participation, ownership, and inclusion. We are very sorry, we're not doing great on time, so we'll now just straight away open the floor to all of you for your questions, insights, or comments. Please introduce yourselves, and in case you're asking a question, please let us know if it's addressed to a specific panelist or the entire panel. Are there any questions? Yes. Okay. We can start from you, at the back, and then you. Yes.
Thank you for that. My name is Gambir Bhatta from New Zealand. Question is for Neeta. You talked about the theory of change and the issues of thinking about accountability and learning as well. And what strikes me is that, because I spent 15 years working at ADB and quite familiar with the whole idea of theory of change and the difference between accountability and learning. And I wanted to focus more on the learning part, because it's easy to talk about issues of accountability because there are very strict ways of thinking about what makes an entity accountable to the board, for example. But in terms of learning, is there a certain sense that you have about inadequacies within the system that inhibits the learning process to be encouraged, if you know what I mean. As in, are there enough measures in place? I mean, I don't know how long you've been with the ADB now, but in the 15 years that I was there, and I headed the Knowledge Advisory Services Center, that was one of the key questions that we always had. What is it that is learning, and how is it that we're measuring it? I never thought about it from the perspective of the theory of change, but it'd be something I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about the mechanisms that are in place now to be able to say, for IED, to say, for example, that we've now got our equation right with respect to how to enhance learning. Thank you.
Loud as a person. So how to think about all those, and I guess and I was thinking more from Mitch's perspective to Marty's perspective, how to think differently. So, or maybe even Neeta, you can answer because you a tone of it. So, okay.
Thank you. Yunji Kim from Green Climate Fund, Independent Evaluation Unit. Thank you very much for this very informative session. I really enjoyed it. I want to ask questions to Neeta. I really appreciated this ex post perspective when even thinking about a TOC. I do think that while we are living in a very rapidly changing, evolving society, and we have witnessed rising vulnerabilities as well, we are not really taking into consideration the need for such ex post action and revisiting what was our initial thinking in the design stage. So I really enjoyed it. And then my question to you is, how do we keep the TOC a live document? I want to hear from you, like maybe some of the best practices. We, as an evaluation office, of course, we hold TOC very sacred. We develop it. We include it in our evaluation reports. We inform the GCF Secretariat about it. But beyond the context of evaluation, I do not believe we are having regular meetings to revisit the TOC and really making a live document. So do you have any best practices that you could encourage, maybe for the project teams, operational teams, and even evaluators to come together and, revisit it? So I was curious about that. And also, a question to Marie. Thank you. I really appreciated your balloon squeeze concept, and you did a good job of drawing that. I just wanted to say, between improved access to evaluations and learning, and also the use of evaluations. So you said you had those steps in your balloon. There is a lot still that needs to happen even in between those steps. So what I mean is, coming more from the perspective of evidence use, not just evidence generation, I do think that we need to be more mindful of curating our key message and making the key message more relevant to our key stakeholder groups. And the key stakeholder groups are different. It could be your board of directors, board members, the secretariat, the operational programming teams, and it could also be project implementing entities and accredited entities. And so we also need to be critical of the way that we have been doing our work, as Dean also highlighted yesterday. And we need to invest, I think, more time and resources in those steps as well. Thank you.
Okay. Is that? Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I thank you for all the questions. I think they are representative of the thinking process and the reflection process. Full disclosure, I have spent most of my career working with CSOs and have only been at my first MDB for the last 6 months. So it has been an orientation process for me as well to understand how TOCs are looked at within the context of MDBs and to figure out the difference between where we are in the MDBs and where we are in the CSO world that, for whom TOCs are actually a living, breathing challenge that they grapple with constantly. So with that background, Gambhir, I think coming to your question on how do we think about TOCs in terms of learning. When a TOC is designed, whether it's designed by evaluators retrospectively or whether it's operations teams thinking about what is it that we are trying to accomplish, I think one of the things is trying to map the causal pathways in terms of if we put in these inputs and these activities, then somehow at the end of this magical programmatic process, we're going to end up with all these outcomes or perhaps even impacts that should emerge if everything goes well. I think I have seen, even in the last 6 months, I have seen lesser focus on identifying what are the risks and assumptions going in. What happens if a government changes and is no longer interested in the work that ADB is doing? Or as we talked about COVID, we talked about financial downturns, etc. There are implicit pathways or implicit assumptions that are being made, and I will focus purely on people who are doing TOCs with some amount of sincerity and not just as a checkbox, because then the problem gets even worse if it's just a checkbox. Okay, we're going to create this because we're asked to do it and we're not really interested. But even among evaluation teams, I was surprised to read an IED evaluation where clearly a lot of effort had gone into building a retrospective TOC for an evaluation that IED was doing. It was clear to me from the level of complexity that a lot of thought had gone into it, both from the evaluation and the operation side, like it was a joint exercise. But then in the evaluation report, there was absolutely no reference to did things work out in that exact way. Like there was no reference, it was in the appendix. It's just that even the evaluators did not refer to it. And so we lost an opportunity to look at that and to say, did all this add up in the way that it should have? Did ADB contribute in the way that it should have? If it didn't, which is not a problem, as long as we can make explicit what went wrong and how do we fix that problem. You asked about what stops us or what are the systems in place. I wish I could tell you everything's fine since you left and we now have an ideal system. We don't. Part of the challenge is how difficult is it or how open is the environment for a project team to stand up and say, guess what, our project was unsuccessful. That we failed on sustainability or we failed on efficiency or effectiveness. And that, again, is a lost opportunity in terms of learning, because if you cannot even in your project completion report say, guess what, this didn't work out, then where is the learning aspect or where is the freedom to learn? If you are penalized for saying things didn't work out and you need IED to come in and say, but wait, that didn't actually add up in the way that you're expressing it. Or as I got a response when I questioned the team on why haven't you talked about sustainability, they said IED's page limit is 35 pages and we wanted to stay within that page limit, so we didn't report on sustainability. So these are some of the internal constraints, I would say. We don't currently have an environment where people are okay about saying, this didn't work out in the way that we thought, and here's what we might do differently next time. So the incentives are not set up. We need to do better on that front. There was a question on how to keep TOCs alive, and yes, this is a difficult one as well. There are certain inflection points where, and I think every organization may have different ones, but certainly at ADB, there is a midterm review of the country partnership strategy where the country team comes together to say, okay, where are we at? And maybe in some ways to start brainstorming the next country partnership strategy. And that is a really good inflection point to say, did we move in the direction that we thought we would? And if we haven't, then what possible changes would we want to make now at midterm and what is it that we don't want to change at midterm, but that we should be working towards in our next country partnership strategy. So there are some, I would hope there are some natural inflection points, but even if not, I would strongly recommend that it's something that project teams figure out among themselves. Perhaps our operations colleagues would like to include some of the evaluation folks to help them facilitate that conversation, if not necessarily lead it. So I would look for those kind of openings, but it needs some level of flexibility and adaptability on both sides. I think as an evaluator, when I see certain indicators or when I see certain outcomes that do not link to those indicators, then it becomes a frustration in terms of what we are not spending on climate. Why are you expecting carbon dioxide to decrease, right? In a whole country, if ADB is not contributing a significant amount of funding or activities, then why are we suddenly magically, picking an indicator that says we're going to decrease carbon dioxide levels in a country? These are some of the practical challenges, I think, and maybe this is where the conversation and dialogue between the operations folks and the evaluation folks becomes necessary. I think I'll stop there. I don't want to hog all the airtime, but happy to continue conversations offline.
Would any other panelists like to reflect on this? Otherwise, over to... On projects and systems. Yes, which Mitch can address.
Hello? Yeah. I almost want to respond to Neeta's also comments that she raised, but I'll try to also reply to the project and systems. But it's a conversation between operations and results management and evaluation, because the issue around corporate indicators and how that affects design and the log frames is really, really challenging. And something that we also witness every day. It's projects trying to fit square pegs into round holes because they're trying to meet, operational priorities and things like that. Is one of the big blights to the way we do design. So something that we're very acutely aware of. Trying to think about how to, and I'm going to try and paraphrase, transition from project level TOC to systems level TOC, and issues around attribution. Now, if I understand that question, and I'm not sure I do, but I'll try to, it's understanding how we might be having impact at the portfolio level, where we're actually measuring our impact and how the collaboration of different projects, the aggregation of those are producing joint outcomes, let's say, toward our North Star goals around people, planet, and prosperity. I think there's many people that would argue that we can only measure our impact at the portfolio level, and that the question around attribution of doing so, I think, is acutely hard. And we're not really well equipped organizationally to address that, primarily because we're extremely conservative. And also our country portfolio, our country partnership strategies, our CPSs, they also get evaluated by IED. And so they want to be evaluated against targets and results that they actually have control over. And so they tend to be, let's say, retrospectively looking at projects that will actually be completed during the time in which that CPS is active. So it doesn't give us a very forward-looking strategic document from a result standpoint. That being said, I think that there are real good opportunities to have lower stakes impact evaluations. So how can we look at, and maybe not just ADB, but all the different activities that are happening, how are those aligned to and producing the desired outcomes from a development standpoint? How do we go beyond local effects of these projects? How do we identify indirect effects? I think it was Dr. Kramer from the previous session identified the challenges around that. And we just had a session with the World Bank on how to measure jobs impact, and not just direct jobs, but indirect and induced jobs. So this is really hard, especially when you start thinking about how to measure these impacts. So I think there's a few challenges from when you move from project level TOC to systems level TOC thinking that we're probably not directly equipped to handle, but organizations like 3IE might be able to help us, and SPC perhaps. So over to you.
Thank you, Mitch. Marie, would you like to take the question on evidence uptake from that?
I thought, well, there's two things that I would, oops, is it on? Yeah. I wanted to address actually, you know, or sort of an insight that I think is also interesting for the ADB. So when I was a manager at the IEG, at the World Bank, I was overseeing an evaluation of how the World Bank learns. And one of the things one of the many findings was around how sort of the bureaucratic processes were stacked against sort of updating theories of change, especially if it had to do with reformulations or restructuring, etc. And so, the recommendation that came out of this IG evaluation, one of the many, was sort of, you need to make what you want to happen, you need to make it easy for people, and what you don't want to happen, you need to make it harder. And so, in this particular case, there was a recommendation, okay, let's make updating the theory of change at some point in time, let's make that the default, and then you as a team have to explain why you don't, if you don't. So that's the harder part, is actually not to, whereas now it's the opposite. So that was at least the recommendation. I don't think it's been taken up by the World Bank, as far as I know. I haven't gone back to look, but just a thought on that. And then there was a question specifically to me around the more details of it's a very simplified bird's view. And of course, yes, there's like hundreds of different steps between each of these quizzes. And I think, but very interesting point, yes, exactly. How do you curate messages? How do you really sort of tailor make that to your audience, to the need, to the questions at hand? But my plea is then, okay, do that, but evaluate it. So, for example, in the past, I did an evaluation around different types of policy briefs and different messaging. Does it help if you, for example, have somebody famous and well-known in the field telling you what to take out of the evidence versus just citing the evidence, for example? So just that would be my plea. But yes, I think there's much more, many more steps, and totally agree that this is a very simplified version. But then I thought you are best placed to talk about the last question, I think, on systems. You did such a brilliant job earlier.
I might even start with dynamic theories of change, because I think it's all connected. And I think you can work by stealth also, especially when you're embedded within an organisation. So we have, by stealth, embedded questions that are in a template. We do have templates, I will admit, at our mid-year reflection point, which every team has to do at the project, program, division, whole of portfolio level, which require you to be evaluating your theory of change. Now, teams wouldn't know they're doing that because they're just kind of having this reflective conversation. They often build in some great kind of participatory games and things, but when they give us their template back, we can see how they're going in terms of the different parts of their theory of change. And when we do a meta synthesis of that for the whole of portfolio level, the summary of that goes into our Director General's report to our Governing Council meeting. So then we build it into our governance process by stealth as well. So I think you can practice things without having to tell your project staff that they're re-looking at their theories of change. And then in terms of systems, I mean, I think that's part of to be able to work in systems, you have to map the system. You know, whether it's the ecosystem, the evidence ecosystem, the system in terms of partners. And just speaking from the Pacific perspective, you need to do that because we have to work relationally. And so if you want to work across a system, then you need to understand your relationship within that system, your points of connection, and then what are the enablers, what are those conditions that help system level change thrive, and build your theories of change around understanding the system, the relationships in the system, the dynamics of the system, the drivers of change in the system, and build that into a dynamic process of reflecting and adapting, but definitely knowing how to package that up into communication products that suit the different audiences so that it's useful and used, particularly at the political level, is the amazing dance, right? And change the music if the dance isn't working.
Should we take some more questions? Yeah. It's lunchtime. We would have loved to take more questions, but I'm hoping we can continue this conversation over lunch or over the next 2 days. Thank you so much, all of you panelists and the audience, for joining us today.